there, you're doing it. Well, I'm playing a passive chair role, but it's always, you're your own to ask you questions. I'm really just doing the handout.
We're on lunch.
Well, if I got back behind in the last session, we give people a few minutes to answer specific questions with a view to them then having another few minutes at the end to ask.
We're on lunch.
Yes, we are.
Oh, it's Harry. Dr. Blue.
Well, if you come in, John,
And Keegan.
Yes,
He's here.
Yes, he's here.
And Becky?
Yes, Becky.
Where are Imagine a lot of
Yes.
And they have to make it worse. They have to make it worse by telling you.
Now there's water bottles here. I went to visit Jeffrey and I got one. Oh, did you have one?
Yes, it's booming at the moment, and
It's all over the place. Sure. She was taking it through one of the struggles at press.
Okay.
And do you have technology?
Yes, we do.
Oh, right. Oh, I'm so very good. And I was just saying, oh, yeah.
Just go there.
We're going to get going in a minute. I'm conscious that this is extremely large for presentations of change. So if people would like to move forward, that would probably be really helpful for the speakers who don't have to need to yell at you. And also create a greater capacity for dialogue with each other. Where? The lecture? Did you see that as an email?
no, I'm just trying to explain that. Go on.
Yes. Hello. For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Barraket and I'm chairing this session. We're going to do it in the same style we did in the last session. I chaired for those of you who were there, which is have the speakers present a few minutes specific questions at the end of each paper, and then if we've got sufficient time at the end, open the floor to get people to ask questions of all the speakers if people are happy with that as a approach. So I'm not going to say too much other than to hand over to Mary, who's going to be speaking about keeping it real, or just making it easy to go and media training life events, the blogosphere and the eCitizens. I don't know about you, but I'm intrigued.
I always have long titles, I'm afraid. I get told off. Yes, I should say just about myself that I've moved from a communications department to a screen and media department, and also countries recently as well, to New Zealand. So I'm building up my cultural capital about New Zealand. I have a couple of references to New Zealand, but a lot of them are Australian because I was last at Monash. I should say something as well about what drove me to this research. I've been involved at local government level in trying to have a youth outreach website. And of course it was exactly the kind that Stephen was describing, which showed the political relationships of government and so on. And of course no one came to it. And I began to start thinking about this word, passion, that keeps on cropping up every time you go in and blog or go into the blogosphere. Interaction has got very different faces depending on who's actually providing the space for interaction. And this word passion is pretty much, I think anyway now, related to non-governmental spaces for civic interaction. So this is the overview of my talk. I'm going to have a quick go through impacts on the formation of eDemocracy and policy responses, and then a case of non-government public service community building, and then political blogs. Now, a lot of this talk, I think, Stephen gave this morning. There is an anxiety about eDemocracy and about democracy itself. There's a perennial crisis talk. And one of the books that I found quite interesting is Cranston and Ginsberg's Downsizing Democracy, which talks about expert government and the way in which, in the public realm, active US citizens now do good work, but they don't actually politically engage very much. There's an era of personal democracy that they talk about. They point to, as well, across the board, globally, decreased civic participation and third sector activity. And I think Robert Putnam's work tells you a little bit about social capital and how it's made. And again, Stephen mentioned diminishing participation in ballots. But because I work in screen and media, I'm quite interested in media and politics. And I'm interested in some of the arguments that Mayer has put forward about the colonisation of politics by media. And he's got a very interesting point about media time and protocols not matching political time, which I think bears upon some of my what I've discovered about the blogosphere. Also, that citizens actually dislike media representations of politics. There's been Mark Cooper's study on the way in which media shapes up political democratic debate around things like celebrity personalities and scandal and hoopla and verbal duels. And this results in a great deal of cynicism about politicians and diminishing trust in democratic processes. And you'd only have to look at the media commentary around these examples to see what was happening in terms of a loss of trust in political processes. Sorry. Again, another sort of point with Stephen Coleman's talk this morning is that once you start looking at eDemocracy and how people conceptualise it, and you're looking at particular media cultures in relation to eDemocracies, you're also seeing that democracies differ in quite considerable ways. And I've just put, in order of scale, the actual democracies or polities that people talk about when they're sharing examples about eDemocracy. So the political arrangements differ, the kinds of practices differ, the kinds of compulsions, whether there's a tradition of civic education or not, whether there's a constitution that must remain rock solid. You can see that in Australia, of course, we have the one compulsory voting and only a beginning kind of civic education. And I'm just getting my head around the New Zealand democracy, the political arrangements anyway, because there's a very strange and interesting system of voting and again a kind of beginning of civic education. So this is important information for conceptualising eDemocracies. They're going to be different. There can be no master term eDemocracy. But one of the things that is similar in all of those four examples is that a responsibilisation of media audiences is occurring. And this is a result of globalization. Market ideologies, weightlessness, the idea of the reduction of state welfare economics, making everyone individually responsible for health, education, job training, old age, provision, and business. And along with that go person-to-person methods of peer-to-peer methods of communication. Again, a kind of personalizing of democracy. As well, public spaces are reducing because globalized and privatized media businesses are often detached from local communities. So what you have is an array of media publics rather than a public sphere. Now, being in media studies again, I looked at the way in which the screen, people watch the screen and acquire political literacies. And one of the main, I think, routine rhetorics of the real is dominated by entertainment techniques. These are the ones that are forming interactive consumerist media publics at the moment and real celebrity objects. And there's a whole series of television genres that spill over into the internet and onto the mobile phone voting that suggest what reality is. And reality is rather a passive thing for most people involved in it. People are passive voyeurs of other people's dramas. So you've got real lifestyle shows, and I'll give some Australian examples of that. Sorry, I'll go off again. Some difficulties here. Real lifestyle shows like the auction squads, the game shows, Millionaire, the kind of buying of voting, the demonstration of losing, the sex reality shows that show that community can be very fragmented and fluid, the confessional talkback that focuses again upon personal kinds of responses to large events. And in Australian Idol and New Zealand Idol, these two game shows around music, they're using quasi-democratic techniques of debate and investigation and polling and voting. Now, this is offering a training to people in methods of democracy, although, of course, if you go into the various sites, you can see there are a lot more issues involved in these processes. You can't actually call them democratic. You can actually, in this case, in the New Zealand Idol case, vote many, many times for your favourite idol, for example. In a way, these ideas are downsizing a notion of democratic processes and yet training people in them. On the New Zealand Idol as well, there's a kind of having your say, which is again using the same words, the same vocabulary as the government technologies, but about a very different thing. New Zealand Idol is passionately adhered to by the New Zealand population. There are local iwis that support their local tribal groups that support their Maori singers. There's a lot of fan activity around this. The age demographic is probably 14 to 25. These are people who are very prepared to go out and vote and become passionate about something like this, about celebrity. Interestingly enough, New Zealand Idol has become a way of demonstrating a bit of cultural cringe as well on the part of New Zealanders, because the Australian Idol, Guy Sebastian, has come out to New Zealand to tell New Zealand audiences how, or rather the idols themselves, how to be humble in accepting awards and also how to be charming to their fans and so on. So, you know, culturally, this demonstration of losing is quite interesting when you're watching democratic purposes as well. Here we've got a public service broadcaster, again moving into the area of privileged sphere of opinion making. So, despite what Stephen said this morning about the quick fix prefix, I think it is a shorthand way of saying that people are mobilising in all kinds of different ways, but in entertainment they are actually mobilising more and learning a lot about how to be online together. So the question is really, where is the shared public space for debate? We've got one good example in the ConCon, the Constitutional Convention that was televised some time ago. National televised debate about the Constitution, but by and large there are no large consultations or publicised consultations. Now, government responds to these challenges in a number of ways, and I think the information portals and the relevance, the word relevance that comes into policy making, demonstrates how government is responding to a media literate audience, but perhaps not a politically literate audience. In the case of Victoria, for example, we had the policy of putting people at the centre, which had one of its peers as providing community engagement and effective democracy. And one kind of example, I suppose, of a policy that's been going for a long time is the 6 channels that the Victorian government has put up, which are organised, again, rather like media entertainment, around lifestyle choices or life events. These have got very high production and use values. They're coaching for the life game, and they demonstrate a kind of technologies of the self notion. Here's just one example, the Health Channel, which works as a lifestyle magazine. It gives tremendous information, lots of information there. If you've got a sickness, you can look it up. You can look up a doctor. You can have information that's directly associated with different stages of life. But this is basically an old-style way of presenting a government-citizen relationship. All right, there's some interactivity going on. The citizen becomes the researcher. The citizen can draw up whatever kind of information they want. This is a dynamic site. And yet, there are no, it's completely depoliticized. You have no sense of joining a community. You have no sense of whether you can track down the wonderfully sophisticated intranet owners who have produced this site. It's completely depoliticized. It's about playing the life game as it is at the moment. And it demonstrates a kind of attitude to governing, which is that it's much easier to govern if you have this kind of information. The messiness of having to have a back end answering emails and so on isn't there, and yet it looks as if it's being interactive. So do these developments depoliticize users? Yes, I think when people are interpolated as consumers of information, then it is depoliticizing the citizenry. And I think it's a sign, actually, of the expert public servant that has to give up power to the citizenry in order to make eDemocracy work. Of course, there are other kinds of participatory experiments and initiatives going on. Interestingly, webcasting seems to be quite popular at the local level. At least that's the information that comes from Sydney. But what about the representative in amongst all of this? Here we've got a representative from the UK who runs her own blog, and she's a Lib Dem councillor. She wants to stand for Parliament. She's interviewed as Personality of the Week on Blogman, and she's talking about her sense of disempowerment when she goes along to an e-government meeting. The experts, the technocrats have all the information. The representative just shuts up, courteously considering that she's not going to ask any questions that are going to prolong the meeting. The answer, of course, is, as Lessig is right, that the trick is to turn the audience into the speaker, as was mentioned this morning. And the challenge is to find a way to build community without the community feeling built. I think there's an example of that on the BBC's ICANN. The BBC manages, it's a support portal for active citizens' mobilisation. This isn't about setting agendas, it's about allowing citizens to set agendas and providing the tools, the online tools, and other kinds of information like how to do a leaflet drop, which most citizens would be quite interested in. Some of the topics, of course, are the perennial ones of local government, how to get rid of dog dirt in the local area, or how to protest a particular tree being taken down. But here you've got a public service provider doing something in a very un-Auntie Bee kind of way. The only thing that demonstrates that it's a government kind of agency is that real login is required for the debates. The ABC has a very different kind of approach. This is building community, a community of people who want to discuss the news. They are allowed pseudonyms, and it is a moderated debate. But again, there are quite a few repeat subscribers here, repeat posters. Well, what about blogs? Blogs, I think, are a newish democratic form. They've come out of a particular kind of genre, which is the homepage narrative. Therefore, rather like personalised democracy, they have a rugged individualism. They're very self-referential, and they refer to favourite other kinds of blogs. They're documenting the real every day from the ground. There are all kinds of links, creating what we now call, or some people call, the blogsphere or the blogosphere. And the blogosphere is now assuming its own kind of material shape, I suppose, in the sense that it's mapped and charted and investigated and ranked, and frequency of visits and so on are starting to be counted. There are the usual sorts of problems around what kind of information is on the blogs. There are connections to mainstream journalism. There are a lot of articles about the way in which the samizdat of the blogs raises issues or sets agendas that mainstream newspapers can't handle or won't handle. But then after a time lag of some kind, these ideas do appear, or these stories do appear. The modes of address are very diverse. They're idiosyncratic. Some of them are rants and raves. I'm using the Wikipedia definition here. Wikipedia is a collective dictionary which anyone can add to, so it remains very current. What is the democratic potential? Well, I think what attracts people to the blogs is the open nature of the form, as Adriana Huffington says. She's a journalist, but she's created her own blog recently. Bloggers show their work. If you are not accurate on a blog, you will be shown up. People will stop visiting you. You have to be accurate, you have to be on the minute, you have to link to the right kinds of sites. Here's an Australian example. How do we think about it? Is there an elite, as there appears to be on the internet? Well, people have used this word of bourgeoisie, the new elite, A-list bloggers talking to themselves. So there's a sense in which the blogosphere, however much potential it has, might actually replicate some of the power relations of authoritative speakers. But other analogies for it have been the media ecosystem, which is quite an attractive one, or the network of coffee houses, a reference back to the 18th century, where people actually sat and talked about politics together, referred to each other. You can see that what I was talking about, this sort of ranking, is going on everywhere of which are the most popular blogs. These are some of the most popular blogs: Instapundit, The Daily Kos. What sort of democratic spaces are politicians' blogs creating? Because politicians are moving in. I've got some examples here, including a spoof example, which is someone writing under the alias John Howard, blogspot, which you might like to have a look at. It's quoted in the US on another blog. You've got, can this number 10 be thought of as a blog? You can email the Prime Minister. You can actually watch our exclusive film on life behind the most famous front door in the world. Hardly. If one does email the Prime Minister, it's most unlikely that Tony will reply to you. However, I have received myself a letter from Tony, but it's a syndicated one because I belong to a political party. But here we've got this idea of the lifestyle, the idea of media trainings, that we can look behind Big Brother's household, behind number 10. We can see what the life in number 10 is like. The audience for that is global. It is not Tony Blair's party. It might be Labour Party supporters. But how is it actually creating a new citizen? This is about voyeurism. It's hardly about citizenship. On the other hand, in Canada, we've got somebody who's been customising a constituency database for a very long time, Joe Mikovic, and he is actually community building. You can tell him your interests. If anything's happening in Toronto that you should know about, he will tell you. Tom Watson is one of the most constantly referenced bloggers. He's a Labour Party MP for West Bromwich East. And again, it's a mix of the kind of intimacy that Stephen was talking about this morning, the kind of personal remarks, and also some policy debate going on. the comments fluctuate. I haven't done a detailed look at exactly which topics create the most interest, but this is a mapping exercise for me, and I'm hoping to do some more work on it. And so you do get sometimes comments of relevance to other e-citizens, people who are interested in what Google is doing and so on. Gary Hart's blog was a completely one-purpose theme blog, which closed when the election, when his chance in the election went, closed until further notice. But while it was up, it was extremely focused and built community, just for that short time, rather like a political application of Ryan Gould's smart mobs, flash mobs. Here we've got someone who's trying to build up local links in his community, James Mills. There are no comments for most of his postings. So his attempt at interactivity is not actually working. And right here in Australia, we've got Meg Lees in a kind of combination of political marketing and a conduit for anchoring reflective democracy. Meg doesn't tell you a lot about herself. She tells you a lot more about what's going on in politics. This is a true political blog. On the other hand, on the sort of slightly more ridiculous and popular side, we've got Simon Hughes, who is after the City of London mayoral candidature in June, and his site is full of, again, humanising jokes and intimacy. I suppose the one that I found closest to what Stephen was talking about, the humanising or the intimacy attempt, is this one by Stuart Bruce, which is telling us exactly what his favourite films are and also his frequency and his favourite blogs. So at best, I think, the blogger can act in the interstices of media inscriptions and e-commerce and e-government commodifications of democracy, form communities of political interest, set alternative agendas for democratic debate, and at the very worst, I think you get elitism, rants, narcissism, reducing the time for real political mobilisation. It can capture political audiences by offering the appearance of democratic debate without much substance. And I've attempted to start thinking about how you might conceptualise the citizen audience and the various kinds of political interpolations here. I'm not quite sure about where BBC ICANN and ABC News discussions are, but you can see that the question that arises in my mind is, should the public sector actually be engaging in being the host for particular kinds of chat or building of community? And should it leave it to public providers like the BBC? What kinds of things are going to happen around the political representatives? And over here there's a nice twist which you can't see, which links up political advertising and spin with state government information. So it's a very blurry kind of area, but one which I think has got some possibilities in the future. So, yeah. I'll finish there. You can read that.
Poor Mary's sitting there going, why?
Yeah. Sorry.
I have a question. How do you build community without community feel like it's being built?
Well, I think the ICANN site is an attempt to suggest that, that it's actually leaving it in the hands of the community builders to say what kind of community around what kind of question. But there isn't anything as yet, I don't think, in Australia that does that same kind of thing. The tools are there online.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Okay.
And now we're going to be moving on to Graham Young and Terry Flew, who are going to be talking about just this issue, building eDemocracy from the ground up. We'll just do a quick technology changeover.
Is yours on the desktop?
That one.
Oh, it's actually just that's cool.
Thanks very much. I should say I'll be the warm-up act for this presentation. It'll be primarily about Graham's experience in developing the online opinion site, but in pointing out parodic websites, I'm pleased you found the John Howard blog. I should also recommend the real Mark Latham as one to look out for, that Mark gets a bit more unplugged than he is in his current incarnation. As Stevens and other presentations have pointed out today, there have been a lot of ambitions for greatly enhancing democratic participation and political decision-making through digital ICTs. And I recall John Katz's articles in Wired magazine during the 1996 US presidential election, where Katz was talking about this idea of a new digital nation, populated by a new kind of online citizen that he called the netizen, who marked the future of politics through their capacity to bypass traditional media and political gatekeepers and engage more directly in decisions which affect their lives. And many other studies from the mid to late 1990s refer to this possibility. And these studies typically draw attention to some variant of these six characteristics of the democratic potential of ICTs. Their ability to promote horizontal or peer-to-peer communication, as distinct from vertical or top-down communication, the capacity for users to access, share and verify information from a wide range of global sources, the comparative lack of government controls over the internet as a global communications medium as compared to more territorially based media, the ability to form virtual communities or online communities of interest that are less constrained by geography, the capacity to disseminate opinions, debate and deliberate upon current issues and to challenge professional and official positions, and finally this potential for political disintermediation or communication that is not filtered by political organisations, spin doctors or the established news media. In terms of the demand to reinvigorate political communication and participation, the internet emerged at a good time. Such an interactive, diversified and inclusive medium was popularised globally at almost precisely the time, as Professor Coleman's presentation noted this morning, when political analysts, governments, political organisations, policymakers and others were identifying three distinct but related problems with politics as usual. The first was the widely discussed crisis of democracy, marked on the one hand by the difficulties faced by governments at all levels in managing the economy and in managing civic life in increasingly globalised, complex, diversified societies. Also the crisis of credibility of existing political institutions as the political process appeared increasingly captured by money politics, special interests, a distant technocratic logic and media spectacle. And as Coleman and Gotts have observed, as citizens have become less deferential and dependent and more consumerist and volatile, old styles of representation have come under pressure to change. The second discourse that emerges in this period is that of the well-known social capital thesis developed by Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam, among others. And Putnam attributes the decline in social capital to a declining participation in civic networks and organisations, which he saw as in turn leading to a wider decline in forms of political engagement. And Putnam draws attention in his work to the adverse consequences that has for economic performance, social cohesion and the delivery of public services. Now, while Putnam himself was an internet sceptic, pointing to issues around unequal access to the internet and the dangers of what he terms cyber balkanisation, others have argued that the internet is promoting a transformation of forms of civic engagement, particularly among younger users, where this form of engagement is becoming more important than participating in locality-based community organisations such as sporting teams, local churches or Rotary clubs. Finally, ICTs have been identified as being important to strengthening the relationship between governments and citizens, thereby improving policy making, public trust in governments and good governance. And in particular, the OECD has been important here in promoting the argument that policy making and engagement with citizens needs to move from the information provision model to the consultation model to the active participation model, which they see as promoting active citizenship and a role for citizens in shaping policy options, the policy dialogue and policy outcomes. What I would want to emphasise is that these three elements that I've drawn upon here are connected, but they are not synonymous with one another. They're connected in the sense that three circles in a Venn diagram are connected to each other. And I think some of the problems we've had with the e-government, e-democracy debate has been the tendency to conflate these three issues and to try and find single panacea for what are interconnected sets of issues. The bursting of the dot-com share market bubble in April 2000 certainly has encouraged circumspection about grandiose claims about the transformative impact of new media, and the empirical evidence on both e-government initiatives and the applications of new media by existing political organisations also point to the limits of the transformative impact of the web upon politics and political discourse. That the challenge remains of how to deal with this relationship between historically centralised institutional forms and decentralised networks, and the challenge to create a link between e-government and e-democracy, to transcend the one-way model of service delivery and exploit for democratic purposes the feedback paths that are inherent to digital media. And indeed, Pat Bishop's presentation in the earlier session here drew attention to some of those gaps between the e-government scorecard, which would find countries like Singapore and indeed China as among the leaders, and actual emerging forms of e-democracy that transform the political sphere. And as Bellamy and Taylor anticipated, such approaches to e-government could have the danger of promoting a form of what they call consumer democracy, which was beneficial to the agencies concerned and also, in terms of better service provision, beneficial to the users, but did little to enrich the democratic process along the lines envisaged. And it's worth noting in the Australian context, I'll actually just go back one. In the Australian context, a comparative study into e-government initiatives in 7 countries by Patrick Dunleavy and colleagues at the London School of Economics noted that Australia had been falling back from what they saw as its pioneering e-government status to being a slightly complacent and strategyless follower of a wave now led from elsewhere. And I would suggest that a factor in that has been the tendency to conflate e-commerce, e-government and e-democracy, and to conflate the idea that advances in one field automatically promoted advances in another. Finally, on that issue of internet and political campaigns, I won't say a lot at this point, except I will note that the use of the internet and ICTs by politicians and political organisations has been patchy at best, and has too often taken the form of what Manuel Castells has termed, quote, an electronic billboard used to post information without much effort at real interaction. And the internet's still being seen, and I draw here on a study by Stephen Ward and Rachel Gibson in relation to the 2001 UK general election, that the internet still appears to form an optional device in the toolbox of most would-be and established politicians, and launching oneself into cyberspace appears to be largely a matter of personal whim rather than any compelling rationale. Finally, I would just make a couple of comments on the Howard Dean campaign and the Howard Dean experience. And I think it's important in reflecting on this that we differentiate between the pros and cons of Howard Dean as a potential aspirant for US President and the actual innovations in the campaigning style. And I note that Martin Stewart Weeks has argued that lasting legacies of the Dean experiment as a qualitative step progression in online campaigning were operational, as the team actually put into practice the potential of the internet to promote linkages and new communities of interest. Secondly, involvement in the campaign was driven by a bottom-up negotiation to connect others in an ongoing conversation, and to ensure that the outcomes of those deliberations were reflected in the platform of the leadership. And finally, the Dean campaign suggested that, in an era that is still one in many respects of top-down managed communication, or what critics would term spin doctoring, there is a large reservoir of resentment towards those strategies to control the political process that can generate much untapped enthusiasm and support if it is seen to entail trust, two-way communication and lateral connection in a genuine non-manipulative manner. I'll leave it at that point and open up for Graham. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Terry. like to say it's a pleasure being here. I wasn't planning on doing that a bit earlier or later last year until I sat down and tried to convince the politics department at this university to get involved in what we're doing, and said, well, I probably should come to your conference. And Peter Chen said to me, well, why are you doing what you're doing? And I told him, and he said, well, why don't you just come along and say that? That'll be good enough. So if you don't like the opening of this speech, you can complain to Peter afterwards. The first thing I want to do, because I think of this in geographic terms, is to lay out a few contours for you as to what we're doing with online opinion, which, if you haven't yet seen it on the net, is an e-journal, but which is morphing into a portal called National Forum. One of the great regrets in my life was that about 567 years ago I missed a really significant invention, and that was the printing press. Without movable type, things would have been completely different from what they are now. You might not have had the Reformation. You certainly wouldn't have had anything like the universal education that we have today. You wouldn't have had the sort of political parties that we have today. You wouldn't be able to read the Bible like you can today. And this guy wouldn't have filled up so many books of quotations, because he would have been as anonymous as just about every other writer of medieval mystery plays before him was. It made a profound difference on the way that we were able to manipulate our world. And I went through my university career. I studied English literature as an undergraduate, did an honours degree, and I went through my university career saying, wow, if only I could have been back there then. And then about 6 years ago, having gone from university, worked in finance, become a property developer, and all the way along, having had a career part-time, unpaid, but at quite high professional levels in some respect in the Liberal Party, I came in contact with the internet. And I thought, my God, this is to our civilisation at this point in time what the printing press, what movable type was 500 or 600 years ago. Whatever else you do in the rest of your life, Graham, you've got to be involved in this, because you'll certainly have good cause to kick yourself if you miss out. Now, a few other things happened at the same time that made what I'm doing now possible. One of those was that I had a falling out with the Queensland Liberal Party. I'd been Vice President and Campaign Chairman. Originally got involved because I was interested in Polestar. I was actually interested in the girl as well, and she was in Young Liberals, so the two had a happy confluence. But my main claim to fame is strategising and running the campaign that knocked Wayne Gossoff in 1995, Australia's most popular politician at the time. We had a crowd that the Courier Mail called the easy beats or the dead beats. We still managed to win the election. However, 3 years later on, the party did a deal with One Nation, which upset me, and I had a public falling out, and as a result, had a lot of time on my hands. And I got involved with the campaign, which involved use of emails to try and do something about the One Nation phenomenon. And that's when I really started to appreciate what the net was possible, what it made possible. The left-hand side of my brain, that's the one that does all those nasty mechanical things, the sort of logical side of things, said, wow, what a great campaigning tool. Imagine being able to almost infinitely dissect the market and send each micro-segment or voter a specially tailored email at virtually no cost of production and distribution, apart from time. The other side of my brain said, wait a bit. You with limited resources, apart from time, could use this medium to help people to re-engage with each other and their society in a new and radical way without having to rely on established channels of communication. So what you're basically looking at is a poacher becoming a gamekeeper. And that's why some of the things that we're doing are being done the way they're being done. Because I don't have an academic view of politics, I have a very practical view of politics, and I know what people get up to. And I've got some idea as to what you've got to do, not just to deal with what they get up to, but to try and co-opt them into the process so that what they're doing actually becomes more than the things that they're trying to do and interacts with other people so that you get something which is greater than the whole. So the first stage in what we're doing was online opinion. I started online opinion because I could buy a copy of Front Page, because the economics were in my favour. I discovered there were people out there who'd write op-eds and wouldn't charge you for them. So sitting in a two-bedroom unit in Coorparoo with a laptop, I could put something up on the internet which in 5 years has grown to these sorts of statistics. For those of you who aren't familiar with looking at web statistics, and it's amazing how many people are involved in this space who never ever go and look at the website statistics they're involved with, they're pretty bloody good statistics. To put it in perspective, the Brisbane City Council spent, I think, about $30 million building a portal, and it gets about twice that amount of traffic. We've spent 3 or 4 years and maybe 200, 250, if you take salaries into account and disregard me, and that's what we've managed to do. We've done it gradually, we've done it incrementally, because you can't just, in my view of the world, go out there, change paradigms, and do it by putting something up there. You have to put something out there which shows people what you're trying to do, and then you've got to invite them in to come and do something with it. As a result, we've got, I say 40 volunteer editors there, but I've got 5 or 6 people I've got to phone back, so it's more like 50. We've got 20 volunteer columnists, and we've got a number of politicians who are also involved in the project. But this is only stage 1. What we're trying to do is to build something which is much more comprehensive, much more like that I Can site that Mary just showed to you before. There's 3 paradigms that I use to describe it. One's a town square, one is a shopping centre of ideas, which is where the economics of how we're hoping to sustain the site come in, and the other is a producers co-op. In a town square, not only do you have a space where people can go and interact socially, or where they can go and get petitions signed, or where they can go and have a demonstration, but in town planning terms you have a space which connects a variety of organisations. So what we're trying to do is not just have something where people can go and interact with each other or send messages off to their Member of Parliament. We're trying to have a space where other organisations can mesh in there and can put their material into that space, and where resources are available, so that you can at one level have a conversation, but at another level you can easily find information which enables you to support that conversation at whatever level of depth of intellectual inquiry you want to do it. However, in the real world, a town square essentially looks after itself. Cut the grass, water the garden beds, and the fact that it's geographically there and you have to go past it, that it's in this connecting position, means it works. In the internet, everything is shifting around. There is no settled geography. So that paradigm only gets you so far, which is where our second paradigm comes in, which is the shopping centre of ideas. What you get with the shopping centre is a developer comes along, and when I'm talking about shopping centre, I'm talking about a regional or a sub-regional style of shopping centre, the sort of shopping centre that will have these types of retailers in it. He comes along, or she comes along, finds a space of dirt which has got good access to population and lots of infrastructure, then puts further infrastructure on it which makes the shopping experience easy and enjoyable. They then bring retailers in who find they can actually make more money in that space than they can somewhere else. So they're actually prepared to pay more to be there than they would be somewhere else. There's other aspects of it. There's cost sharing that goes with the shopping centre. You want to air condition the space? It's expensive to do it all on your own. You couldn't air condition the main street, in fact, but if you club together, you can do it. Want a coordinated marketing strategy? Well, we can club together and we can do it. And in a sense, online opinion is our marketing strategy. We've built the catalogue before we built the shopping centre. And what we've reasoned is that we're actually, because we're in a democratic business and most of what we do has to be free to people, that our core business is giving information away. And we wondered how the heck we were going to make that sustainable. And then we realised that there are other organisations out there whose core business also was giving information away. And that if we could give it away for them more efficiently than they could give it away for themselves, there was an economic benefit. And they should be prepared to pay us some of that economic benefit for the service that we were providing. So that's essentially how we hope to make the site work. There's some of the features up there that we're trying to put into it. You can see the blog's getting a work out there. I think they've got a particular level in the debate, and we've got part of our site, which we call the domain after Sydney's domain, where we're anticipating that people will go and do that sort of thing there. We're also talking about email list management, because one of the problems politicians have when trying to interact with constituents with the net is that they drown in the emails that come in, so as a result, their staff will tell you they just delete them all. so they don't actually try and respond. However, if you've got a central site, there are things you can do to make responses possible. The other thing that paradigm is the biased cooperative, because the internet is a process, it's not an artefact, and there are things out there that have to work for you to get optimal performance out of what you're doing here. We've got a core business which is democracy. We've got other people who we're bringing together in this space to use it in democratic ways. We've all got common needs, so we should be, while we're in that space and while we're talking about these things, we should be getting together to go and talk to the providers of services, like, for example, the parliaments who provide Hansard, often are not very friendly way to searching, about how they could do it better to working with our needs. Now, there's a number of editorial considerations that come in this. I might be running out of time, but I'll just try and skip through them. Because essentially, what we're doing is a work of journalism. We reason that if you've got a boring site, then and people are using it, then you really are only getting people there who ought to be counselled. But if you're going to make a site like this work, it's got to be exciting and it's got to be interesting. So we look at it in terms of journalism. We see what we're trying to do is gatekeeping light. We don't think that you can have a space like this work without any sort of structure, without anyone there to a certain extent shepherding, perhaps is the best term, the debate. The way we treat contributors, say, to the journal depends on what capital they bring to the journal. If they're a recognised writer, if they're from a recognised organisation or a recognised institution, we basically give them carte blanche as long as their commas and apostrophes are in the right spot, and we'll sort that out for them. If there's someone new to the debate, then we'll go over it a lot more carefully. And we see part of our role as being trying to nurture people into the debate and show them how to tailor their ideas so that they're accessible to a wider audience. It's quite different from what indie media is trying to do. And I think the proof of the pudding is that the indie media site statistics really aren't that good. You can be too democratically promiscuous, and I think another problem is allowing people to be anonymous. We also have a checks and balances, probably borrowing in a sense from the American, explicit American political theory around the time of the War of Independence. We don't believe that new paradigms just grow. We're also concerned about group polarisation, and Cass Sunstein has done a lot of work on that, and his book Republic.com is worth reading. If you look at our journal, you'll find that we go to great pains to have what I call a multi-partisan point of view, so that while you can be within your comfort zone while you're reading things, you're not entirely within your comfort zone. And there's a real risk, I believe, in the internet that people will just form ghettos, and that you'll get, as Mary said before, A-list bloggers just talking to other A-list bloggers. But also with the net, while I think that software is secondary to people, you can code things in such a way that they do lead to it being more difficult to form ghettos. The last thing I wanted to touch on is bias and balance. We're obviously being paid, in a sense, for the material that goes on the site. Some of the material, not all of it. So there's a question of, well, is what you're doing just advertising, or is it really journalism? It's an issue that's being faced in other areas in electronic publishing. For example, there's a refereed journal now which you pay to go into the refereed journal, rather than the situation that generally pertains where they take the material from you for nothing and may charge you for the use of it when it comes back. It's probably a little different in terms of conflicts of interest than what universities do, where they charge fees for courses where they're going to grade you on whether you pass or fail. We also look at trying to create a balance between articles rather than within articles. I think it's a myth that any journalist can be objective anyway, or that any one article can be balanced. I think you have to have a multiplicity of sources of information, and that in fact that can work to help drive the dynamics of a site like this, because if your competitor's in the space, then in a sense you have to be in the space yourself. The last thing that we're doing, which I think aids the community part, is the brokerage role. One of the brokerage things we do is we do polling off the site. I've heard a couple of presentations today about what's been happening on lists, and an attempt to look at that qualitatively. We actually specifically and explicitly go out there, post a qualitative, partly quantitative, partly qualitative questionnaire on the site, and then select who we'd like to talk to from that in focus groups. in online chat rooms. We've actually had quite a good track record to date in looking at elections and working out what voters are doing, which is generally contrary to what politicians tell you they're doing and what journalists consequently report them doing, what those people, the voters, actually think they're doing. And we've got about 1,000 people who regularly dip into these things. One of the reasons they do is because they feel that even though they're not individually being able to say something to politicians, as a collective we're getting something meaningful out of it. We're also giving them meaningful information because we're giving them another source which is a bit reflective of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And the last point I'd like to make is that I don't think governments are going to be particularly effective in facilitating eDemocracy because a government site isn't going to have the sort of independence and ability to build communities that you need. I think that what governments need to do is to collaborate with organisations like ours so that you can take risks, so that people can be familiar, so you can do things that governments would never be comfortable doing, which are just the sorts of things that you need to socialise. So, in conclusion, our approach, which has worked so far insofar as statistics tells you, is a bit like a barn raising. We've got an overall plan, but we're trying to enlist as many people into that plan to work on it as possible, in the belief that if they come and they work on it, not only will they have ownership of it, but they'll actually be involved in developing it, and you'll end up with something which not only looks better, but works better. Well, the funding at the moment comes from four major funders: University of Sydney, QUT, Local Government Association of Queensland and the Brisbane Institute, and a lot of smaller funders. For that they get membership of the organisation, which is a company limited by guarantee. It's a not-for-profit. They also get, depending on the amount of money, different sort of badging rights, which gives them a notional advertising return. They don't really look at that as being an important aspect, but from our point of view it's an important way of saying to them we appreciate what they're doing. They also get a certain priority in that if Sydney Uni, if an academic from there sends us a paper, then it's going to get treated a lot more quickly and we'll put more time and effort into it than if something comes out of the blue. You can only publish so much information, so they're buying priority as well. They're also buying access to the information that's coming out of it. I mean, we treat it very much as being an ongoing experiment. It's a prototype. They have Sydney Uni, for example, and QUT both have directors on the board. So the money's coming in from there. We're looking to expand the number of smaller members we've got. We're also launching shortly what we call an iParliament. We're going to be charging members of Parliament $250 a year for what's essentially a small mini site, but which will aggregate their material they're putting on that in with a whole lot of other politicians' material. So you get an alternative sort of newspaper generated out of press releases, speeches, things out of Hansard. We're also at some stage going to go out to the public in the same way that fine music stations look for people to be subscribers. You don't get any special right to listen to the signal, but you do get a warm inner glow. We'll be looking to do that. We're also looking for consultancy opportunities with the polling expertise we're building and so on. So I'm not sure where we're going to end up paying the bills from, but I figure out of all of this, something will drop out and then maybe something will come out of left or right field and that'll fix the whole thing up. But, you know, you've got to be in there. You've got to give it a go.
Another question? Okay, we might move on then. Thank you very much for Graham and Terry. And our next speakers are John Hartley and Rennie, who are speaking on show business for ugly people, media wanting for eDemocracy. Great, good title for paper. Now, do we need to do a technology shift for you?
Yep. Yeah, I've got it.
Have you got it sorted out?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, what's that? Show business for ugly people. According to Jay Leno, that's what politics is, show business for ugly people. And it is a deliberately provocative title, apart from the fact that it's just plain funny. We chose it because it highlights something that we do discuss in the paper, which is the idea that show business is now the norm, and politics is the deviation in the way that people engage with the world. So in the paper we explore two aspects of government: information provision and leadership via the media. The public has come to know itself largely through narratives communicated through the press, television and radio. The internet encourages an entirely different approach to public affairs from the press and broadcasting, and it involves personal engagement and availability of information, and it's something which is citizen-led and dispersed. It promotes difference rather than unity, like democracy. It's successionist. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. So we are saying that although this activity has transformed the political landscape, the activities that occur on the internet, that has achieved, and e-government in particular, has achieved little in the way of leadership and national narrative. So that to attempt political renewal through methods of the internet participation also needs to take into account the space where the public turns to for larger narratives of contemporary life. And in the past that has been done through broadcasting. However, the narratives of public life that have been used in the past to create interest in politics may now need rewriting. The public imagination has moved from the affairs of the state, which have been narrated via the news media, to the private sphere, which are narrated by celebrity media. The question of e-government is often posed as a technical one, but the real question is deeper than that, because the representation of the people needs to evolve or modernise, not only to adapt to changes in the media of representation, but also to accommodate changes among the people. So what are those changes? They involve read-write culture, where the media is bringing us issues which we're interested in, which we may not be able to affect through the polling booth. So our questions are, how do you form a relationship with citizens who are more comfortable as consumers, with a public that is more active in private and in the shops than it is in the forum? How do you share democratic deliberation with a polity who are more at home with celebrities than with decision makers, more interested in identity than power, more responsive to affect and experience than to reason and argument? And importantly, how does such a public give governments permission to act? A lot of the questions that we're discussing in the paper stem from those questions of political apathy, which have already been raised today in most papers, so I won't actually go over that part of the paper, except to say that history that Coleman discussed, the euphoria over the internet's democratic potential, part of that history was also kind of a cultural pessimism which followed it, where our interest in difference became worry about fragmentation, and Cass Sunstein, who's just mentioned, does a very good job at discussing that fragmentation. But also in that, of course, the apathetic weren't just losing interest in politics, they were losing interest in being part of a polity, and the gauge of that was declining interest in news. So Patterson is the theorist we use there. Instead, people turned to celebrity, entertainment, reality TV. Politics, or show business for ugly people, was rating poorly. So this was the big context of political apathy. Government was seen as a thing in crisis. The forces that were transforming civil society and business in many positive ways disrupted the narratives that government had relied upon in the past. And as those non-governmental players stepped into the political domain, formal politics became a very confusing and annoying space. Politicians seemed less convincing than they had been once. Journalists seemed more negative. At the same time, expectations for services and information were changing with the rise of the active consumer. So the question is, can e-government stimulate political engagement and renewal? We have this table which we've used to think through some of these issues. And you can see at the intersection of public life and broadcast media, you have news, public life and interactive media. We have blogs and participative media forums. Interactive media and private life is where e-government sits. And broadcast media and private life is reality, TV, celebrity, and even literature. And we've used some terms here, the banal and the fatal, which originally came from Baudrillard, but we found Alan McKee's use of those words most inspiring, and that's really where we drew it from. So the resonance that we have with those terms, which is what we will now be talking about, is that there are these two aspects of government, the banal functions, which is information and service provision, and the fatal, which can be leadership, the pure event, and that which makes us interested in politics, and which often involves the balancing of optimism and pessimism by politicians. So I'm going to start just talking a bit about the banal column, because I like to be banal, and John's going to be fatal. So starting with interactive media and private life, informational e-government. So this is the main use of the internet by government, services and information provision. That involves downloading forms, finding out about rules and processes, and running your private affairs. And it also involves research. And e-government has been doing this function particularly well. And we say that it exists at the intersection of interactive media and private life because it involves the everyday activities of life maintenance, the pursuit of comfort and convenience. And it does possess forms of governmentality and power in the way that Foucault uses those words, but it occurs through the self, not as national direction. And there has been much work already written about the fact that information alone cannot stimulate democracy. I'm referring particularly to Shudson's work, where he goes back into American history, the history of the ballot box, and shows that better processes, universal suffrage and literacy levels have not had as much of an impact upon voting numbers as the progressives who are committed to electoral reform had once hoped. So that booze and spectacle were actually what drew people to vote at times when it was at its highest. And really what he's doing there is talking about the importance of civil society in stimulating political interest. So the idea that the internet will improve democracy via access to information is considered a naive hope. But at the same time, government information can assist citizen-led activities, which are democratic in their own right. It gets used for activities that are personal and creative rather than formally political. And in the paper we talk about genealogy, which is the second biggest use of the internet after pornography. And in that instance you have the National Archives, which are these amazing stores of government information, transforming in their online presence into places where people go to find out about their families and about their nation and about their culture in a personal way. And in 2002, the National Archives in the UK published its entire 32 million entries of the 1901 census, and within 3 hours it crashed as more than 1.2 million people logged on. And the interesting thing about that in terms of democracy is that genealogy was once a pastime of the nobility, and it's certainly not the case anymore. Public information itself is being democratised. And it also indicates that the fact that 95% of the internet is used for research is just as interesting as the fact that 15% of people use it for chat and deliberation. So information may not be the singular key to democracy, but it is increasingly important to those who take a creative interest in their nation and culture. So I'll just do this quickly because I'm going to throw to John in a moment. But interactive media and public life, and in some instances, I think what we're discussing here is the idea of the forum and policy deliberation, which comes back to the idea that government must respond to what Rushkoff calls an open source democracy and engage with its citizens, and it entails accessibility and collaboration in the policy process. And not many attempts at this by government have been that successful. A different model from policy deliberation forums is the blog, which I've already just heard a lot about. And they are a more relaxed and unpredictable form, and they therefore bring a different crowd of people to their sites than the usual suspects involved in policy deliberation. And Tom Watson is a great example. His site, which is relaxed and conversational, and he talks about, meeting a member of the Sex Pistols on the street, and sometimes delves into political issues. And of course there's Howard Dean as well. And the New York Times wrote that Dean's campaign will be etched in our memories both for its revolutionary use of the internet and for its stunningly swift collapse. So Dean inspired devotion from many who were identifying themselves as being apathetic to politics prior to their involvement with him. But what the Dean team did was that they borrowed the tactics of civil society. They mobilised networks. And it's certainly a more activist site than Watson's blog. And the evidence is in the links. There are all these other Dean sites out there, from the workplace, Doctors for Dean, Pilots for Dean and Foodies for Dean, from the internet community, Hacks for Dean, Geeks for Dean and Graphic Designers for Dean, who say that they are beautifying the Dean campaign one pixel at a time. And then there's the rights groups, Dykes for Dean, Blacks for Dean and my favourite, which is Punks for Dean, who have the banner, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. But let's not forget that Dean didn't win when it came to real votes. So civil society methods don't necessarily translate well into party politics and leadership. He was... Oh, what happened? Okay. Ah, have it been hacked? All right. So the question, I suppose, with Dean, he was unable to persuade Democrats that he should be their leading man in the White House, and the bumper sticker said it all. Dated Dean, married Kerry. Participative government needs to work like civil society in order to be successful, but also we need to think about whether we want government in places where civil society might do just as well or better. What can parties such as the US Democrats do to ensure that once they have dated Dean and married Kerry, that they don't end up with Bush? So I'm going to let John answer that question.
Thank you, Ellie. Do I move on? Oh, that's me, is it? Okay, yeah, this is where we turn to the fatal. And this part of the paper is dedicated to the news story of the week throughout the world, which is the marital vicissitudes of David and Victoria Beckham, and the speculation about what might be going on right now in Buckingham Palace, which, as you know, is the seat of government in the United Kingdom these days. At least the dignified part of the Constitution, anyway. So we want to talk about the connection between media and democracy, media and government, and also the connection between government itself and things that are required that are greater than government in order to achieve anything like democracy. So in a way we're following on from Graham Young, who was quite rightly pointing out that you can't have democracy without journalism. And so I guess the important point that we're trying to get at here is that government is not just a matter of administration, not just a matter of information and services. It's also a matter of the identity of a particular collective, whether that's a polity of a nation or of a region. So government is too big for government alone. Government is a dispersed system. And most of what we value about democracy is actually a product of dissent communicated through journalism. Most of what we understand about the we community that we imagine we belong to comes from journalism, comes from media, does not come from government. And so our interest in eDemocracy is to try and think about the problem of what is it that draws people to an identification with, participation in, commitment to the democratic polity that they're supposed to be interested in or citizens of. So we're moving from the banal to the fatal, we're moving from the direct to the representative, we're moving, if you like, from the Protestant to the Catholic. Broadcast and print media are the builders of readership historically. Again, Graham was talking about the development of print. The most important invention of print media is the readership, the vast anonymous mass of people who are attending to similar things at the same time. Newspapers then are read because of their existence as newspapers, because people are habituated to being part of a readership, not necessarily for the content that people find in it, because if you think about news, the actual content of news is not known in advance, and the vast majority of news is actually about events in which any individual reader has very little interest. You have to persuade people to take an interest in news, you have to form them into a readership habituated to taking that interest, no matter what the topic is. So the technique since the beginning of modernity of journalism has been to persuade people to learn about things in which they may have no or little direct interest. By creating curiosity and awareness of politics, the press then has been essential to modern democracy. So that's the importance of journalism to the democratic process, but as several speakers have already pointed out, it's not just the disengagement with politics directly that afflicts the older democracies. It's also the case that news itself is suffering a long-term decline. People are less interested in news, people are more interested in customised versions of news, news is fragmenting, and also news is migrating to completely different topics to keep readers interested. In fact, news is migrating from decision-making to celebrity, from public affairs to identity, and from what was understood to be politics to what is now understood to be entertainment. We are witnessing in journalism the rise of lifestyle media, and many people are leaving the negative and aggressive sort of headline front page news for what's habitually called soft news, news that is concerned with the material and intuitive aspects, of comfort, culture and lifestyle. The media that people want to watch is concerned then with the self, with identity and with the private sphere. However, media still consider issues of nation, and they bring people together to consider in some representational form, even the form of the Beckhams, their contested ambitions as a society. You know, what counts as a marriage is a big question in the papers this week. The media also balance that need for, as it were, pessimism of analysis and optimism of strategy that is so important to politics. That need has not gone away, but now it's much more easily recognised as being fulfilled through discussions and investigations of celebrity, lifestyle, so-called reality, and fiction, literature. All of these areas are concerned with varying degrees with leadership of the community. What is it that binds us together, and where should we be going? With ideals of wealth and comfort, of class and with disenfranchisement, I knew I was going to fall over that word, and our need to get along with each other. These matters are being considered over there in the entertainment celebrity media. So rather than railing against such media, it's worth asking what politicians may learn from the success of these cultural forms in producing stories that do interest and engage so many people, albeit as spectators. And one person who's had a go at that is Stephen Coleman, who's written a very wonderful analysis of what he calls a tale of two houses, where he analyses people's willingness, indeed enthusiasm, and I think Mary was talking about this too, for voting in plebiscitary reality TV forms like Big Brother, compared with their disinclination to be involved in the other kind of voting whatsoever. So what is it that's going on in forms, cultural forms like Big Brother, cultural forms like the play, one might even say, following Graham, like Shakespeare, that combines mass participation in the act of watching with some kind of interactive engagement, some kind of participation through interactive media. And I guess our plea is not to confine e-government and e-democracy discussions to the area of information and services, but to think carefully about what it is that draws people into one form of plebiscitary participation and makes them so completely averse to the other form. So what can we learn from these representative models of society? And I don't know, I can't answer that because I've only got 1 minute to go, so we'll leave that one. Okay, so although e-government reconnects with voters in a very direct way, it neglects the first and primary interface that Big Brother itself has achieved. Politics needs narratives that demonstrate an understanding of the lives and issues of citizens more than it needs media that focus only on party differences and conflict. So our conclusion, is that it? Government today is under pressure to be efficient, not complex, in the provision of services and information. And although it can no longer consider the news media as its natural ally, if it ever did, it must nevertheless continue to balance pessimism and optimism in order to keep the affairs of the nation in the public mind. E-government therefore requires more than direct participation. It requires national narrative. It needs to keep people in touch with the fatal side of life, the side of life where they gather together as spectators. It needs to keep people in touch. I've done that. But government is not well placed to perform this service directly. It requires at least an arm's length, if not completely separate agencies, to perform that function. And those agencies are the entertainment media. So we should be looking for models of e-government that recognise the immense capacity of society to stimulate deliberation and to perform vital services efficiently. But civil society is by its nature dispersed and contradictory. The opportunity of e-government is to provide something that helps us to mark out a strategic direction or trajectory in a complex society. Many of us, from Big Brother viewers to anti-globalisation protesters, see politics as what Stephen calls remote and recondite in its official guise and staged and pointless when it's trying to be persuasive. Perhaps it is the case that when antagonism and destruction are presented as the condition of daily global politics, without any means by which to effect a different outcome, leaving is a sensible rather than an irresponsible decision. If so, this isn't the demise of democracy, but dissatisfaction with the terms of its current form. Political apathy might actually be political intelligence, whether conscious or intuitive, of the inadequacies of the current political climate. It's an intelligence that the media themselves have taught us, and it's a reproach to current democratic leadership. So this doesn't mean that responsiveness, transparency and engagement with community issues are worthless or banal ambitions in the bad sense of that for government. It does mean that if accountability and transparency are to be achieved, they need to occur in and by means of the media. New interactive media are complex and crucial partners of government, just as were their broadcast predecessors. They'll be used by individuals for self-realization services, the banal, and by communities to achieve a collective sense of self, the fatal. And they need to do both of those things. The difficult trick for government agencies and e-commentators alike seems to be to keep these opposing requirements in balance, to learn from citizens why private life, personal identity, emotional affect and experience are so important to the mediation of democracy. Thank you.
There's a risk, talking about Big Brother, also going to pass over here. Is there a risk of confusing spot polling with democratic participation when we talk about stuff like Big Brother? So that's effectively all it is.
It's not effectively all it is. It's effectively all it is if that's all you're interested in. But what's interesting about Big Brother is the way that it actually engages its audience in active participation in something that they're actively interested in. And I think the same goes for what Mary was trying to say. Now, you can judge, if you wish, as I think she did, that this is mere spectatorship or mere voyeurism or the commodification of democracy. You're free to make that judgment. But it's not, I don't think it's wise simply to go past these new plebiscitary phenomena, which are trying to find a form in which to represent back the myriad types of people and communities and character types that there are in a particular society, such that people, viewers, individuals, persons, we can consider them and think about the content of the character and the the disposition of the different forces. And actually Big Brother's quite an efficient mechanism for that. It's a very good thinking machine for deciding about how people are or could be neighbourly, what are the conditions of marriageability, what I suppose it's vicissitudes, the dangers, the risks of populism or of scheming or all sorts of other very human characteristics are thought through in detail and very much on the surface of games like Big Brother, perhaps particularly Big Brother. It's quite a good one of its type, in ways that I think we would do well to take seriously, because just thinking of entertainment as something completely passive in which there is no consequence, either for the people who are doing the sitting or for the society within which this entertainment takes place. I think this is what's going on in there.
I don't know why that. I was just saying the risk of overestimating its significance. The other question I had was, you stated that citizens are more interested in identity than power. Taking this draconian approach a step further, and citizens not more interested in identity because of power. And this somewhat alludes to your statement, Mary, about the responsibilisation itself.
I don't know. I don't know how to talk about those kinds of things, because I think...
I'm just quoting your paper.
Yeah, I understand that we were saying that there is an interest in among readerships in celebrity identity and what people think of as entertainment. And a move away in news media from an interest in what's been understood as the decision maker in society. There is a clear shift. You can see it, and the quality newspapers are just as full of celebrity and identity stories as the tabloids. This is it's an across the board change in the way news is actually constructed and circulated. So there's something going on in the news that we're trying to take account of. But whether that means people are less interested in power, I'm not so sure. I don't think that necessarily follows. I think there are aspects of power involved in all of the things on the celebrity side or on the entertainment side and the identity side, as much as there are over on the political side. And we're trying to find ways of thinking about what it is that might bring those two areas back together again, rather than saying that all the power is on one side and all the passivity is on the other. That's exactly the point we're trying to contest.
In one very specific one very specific start to me. I think that since the 11th of September 2001, politics has become traumatized. News is drama. We live in a very peculiar world where people, where I come from, is putting up with fire. Every time an aeroplane goes over, somebody looks at it. Every time you sit on a train, every time the news book, every time I go to the BBC News website, there is this sense, not that something will happen, but the end of the world will happen. We are in this kind of apocalyptic moment. It's quite horrible, quite risky, uncontrollable, all of those things. And in a sense, and what's interesting is, of course, when people watch 9/11 on television, the first thing that everyone said that day, and you hear what it said as well, was it's like watching film. It's like a simulation of a simulation. So there is this very peculiar kind of rigidity between what is real and what is kind of consumer entertainment. And I'm not 100% certain about our capacity to differentiate between them.
I certainly think that's a fair comment, and I've been arguing for quite a long time that people ought to think about the dramatic and spectacular aspects of news just as much as they need to think about sometimes the power aspects of private life. So I'm very much on your side there. And it's also clear that media are not either one thing or the other. One of the things that interests me is the extent to which the internet on the 10th of September 2001 was all about Britney Spears. The searches, you get the rankings of the searches, they're just exactly as you would predict in a private, pleasure-oriented entertainment medium. And then the following day, they're all about the flag, they're all about the country, they're all about these groups. So what we're now faced with is media that are themselves hybrid. They're usable for private comfort or consumerism one moment, and for public affairs and journalism the next, same media. So that's part of an answer.
Following on from Stephen's point, politics has always been drama. Of course, historically, that drama. This comes back to my question. So your question is about readsheets were created by print culture, not civil society. Because it was readerships, not readership. Readerships. And there was diverse markets for different types of newspapers. That was part, I suspect, that our economy is setting up, set up in the post-war world of what public broadcasting and public broadcasting news is about. That as opposed to go to tabloid fiction, because there's these sharp dichotomies ignoring aren't sharp at all. In actual fact, go through the archives of old tabloids, a fantastic tradition of the glaring drama of politics, the glaring drama of the celebrity of its age. I think what's troubling about the way you set it up, because you say, well, now people are more interested in celebrity than they are in politics. And so, without sort of saying, well, where does this come from? Because I can say in the 1960s, the start of the 1960s in American politics, there was the making of the Griffiths, the profiling of Kennedy. At the end of the 1960s, there was the selling of the Griffiths. Here you can see these shifts that are going on, but I'm not quite sure how this fits in with the new media for the state. There's a long communication system here, which I think is inflating, and saying, here was the model once, the post-war model of public service broadcasting, which said, here is news, here is entertainment. Now suddenly the entertainment is, if you like, drowning the news agency. So I think in part, yes, readership, but readership, there was readerships. I mean, sort of, there's party political, the big mass circulation European newspapers were party political. If we want to say that was news per se, then we've got to get back into sort of ideological conditions and stuff like that. So my question is, what is my question? Sorry. Do you feel as though you're making too much of a dichotomy?
No, I feel as though I'm at a conference where I've got 20 minutes. And I recommend that you read all 12 of my books, where I do a history of the Western media from the Reformation to the current moment in an attempt to precisely complicate those binaries in the way that you've suggested. But what we're doing here today is seeking to go to the next place, which is to talk about eDemocracy rather than just regular old analog democracy. And there I think the question that was preoccupying us wasn't to re-establish some old-fashioned binaries, but to say that the attention that we see eDemocracy getting from people who are interested in in promoting its cause, particularly in governments, forgets that nation-building, spectacular, dramatic side of the modern media, which, as far as I'm concerned, are a large part of why people take an interest in it and indeed what it's for. So the question's moved on a bit rather than an attempt to tell a history of the relations between politics and entertainment, which is incredibly interestingly complicated and always has been. But in the context of eDemocracy, I don't see any discussion of entertainment whatsoever. I think people just forget about it and start talking about government services and putting out information on a website, which is barely entertaining at all, as you've seen from several of the examples we've seen today. So we're really arguing for where has that fatal aspect of democratic journalism gone in discussions about eDemocracy.
Final word to Terry, and the collective pressure on you.
Okay, final two words. First of all, in relation to Stephen's comments on 9/11. Those of us who were in Australia at that time...
Terry, you have to be here.
For those of us who were in Australia on just after 9/11, one of the first programs put together by an Australian news network was by the Nine Network, and it was called The Day the World Changed. And the fact that it was hosted by Ray Martin, who has been kind of the public face of Channel 9 for about 25 years, was itself a reminder that in many respects the world hadn't changed. Certainly Ray Martin was still there to tell you that it had. I did want to just pick up on an earlier point there about the plebiscitary and deliberative dimensions of this. And I think, an interesting contrasting site to the online opinion site that Graham was talking about is the Dick Morris Vote.com site, where you get myriad opportunities to vote on any number of questions that are put to you. It's put to you that this information will go directly to Congress people. The catch here, of course, is that your personal information can be on-sold in myriad ways, and there's very little sign that that sort of Vote.com type plebiscitary model has changed anything. It's money politics by any means. So I think in thinking through these things, the need to develop some kind of deliberative framework, as Stephen drew attention to earlier, is going to prove to be important.